So, what if I told you that the exact strategy that basically built modern Silicon Valley, that whole launch fast, break things, pivot until you get lucky mantra?
Right, the classic startup gospel.
Yeah, exactly. What if I told you that exact strategy is actually what's going to bankrupt the next generation of founders?
I mean, it is a really bitter pill for a lot of people to swallow,
Right.
honestly, especially because, like you said, that strategy is treated as absolute gospel in the tech world.
Mm-hmm.
But the math on it is just, it's breaking down in real time.
And that breakdown is exactly what we are dissecting today. So, welcome to the deep dive. We are unpacking this really fascinating paradigm shifting framework by Paramendra Kumar Bhagat. It's titled The Columbus Way, the Neil Armstrong Way, from unicorns to
It's
Solaras.
a fantastic text,
Yeah.
really dense, but super critical.
Oh, absolutely. And the mission today is to equip you, the listener, whether you're a founder or maybe an operator or really just someone trying to understand where these massive global markets are heading. We want to give you the operational blueprint for building at a civilization changing scale.
Which is a big promise. All right. But it's necessary.
Totally. We are talking about moving from this era of accidental greatness to an era of, well, engineered futures.
Yeah, and doing that requires completely dismantling the mythology we've built up around the unicorn company.
Right, the billion-dollar valuation.
Exactly. For the last decade or so, that billion-dollar mark was the ultimate benchmark. And the accepted method for getting there was just to launch a minimum viable product, an MVP, throw it into the market completely blind, and then just iterate based on whatever user feedback you got.
Right, which Vagat calls the Columbus Way in the book, which makes total sense when you think about it. You basically set sail with incomplete maps, you have this vague ambition to find India, and then if you accidentally bump into the Americas,
You plant a flag and spin the PR narrative.
exactly, you pretend that was the plan all
It
along.
is the perfect distillation of the Columbus entrepreneur. But, it relies entirely on a really high variance environment where the cost of exploration is relatively low. The market has to be forgiving enough to let you wander around.
Right?
But Fagat contrasts this with what he calls the Neil Armstrong way.
The Apollo program.
Yes,
Yeah.
the Apollo program was not an exercise in wandering.
Yeah.
NASA didn't just launch a rocket and say, uh, let's just get generally better at space travel and see if we hit a moon or like a satellite or something.
Right. They had a very singular, absolutely non-negotiable destination.
A hyper-specific destination.
Yeah.
They had a non-negotiable timeline of a decade, and they literally engineered backward from that point.
Hmm.
Ground control, course corrections, risk management, sequenced milestones. The Armstrong ethos is basically vision, plan, execute. It's mission before movement.
Okay, I hear that, but I have to put up a massive defense of the Columbus method right out of the gate here.
Sure, go for it.
Because if you look at the landscape of the tech giants today, I mean, wandering works. It works spectacularly well sometimes.
In certain contexts, sure.
Right, like look at Slack. They were building I think it was a bizarre online video game called Glitch.
Yeah, glitch. It
Yeah.
failed completely.
Exactly, fail. But the internal chat tool they built just to talk to each other while coding that failed game, that became Slack or Instagram. It started as this bloated, messy location check-in app called Bourbon.
Right, they had a bunch of useless features.
Yeah, and they realized people just wanted the photo filters, stripped everything else away, and boom, multi-billion-dollar behemoth. So, if you're a founder listening to this deep dive right now, why on earth would you abandon a method of exploration that produces, Slacks and Instagram? It kind of feels like telling a jazz musician to stop improvising and just read sheet music.
Well, it's a great analogy, but here's the problem. You're only looking at the jazz musicians who won Grammys,
Mhm.
right? And you're completely ignoring the millions of garage bands making basically unlistenable noise.
Ah, survivorship bias.
Exactly. The defense you just mounted is the textbook definition of survivorship bias. We love to canonize the pivots that result in unicorns, but the source material forces us to look at the other side of the ledger. For every Slack or Instagram, there are 10,000 companies that they just drown.
So you're saying the wandering isn't free?
It carries massive hidden costs. And the most destructive one is strategic drift. When you don't have a rigid destination, every little tactical decision, like a new feature request from a loud client or some shiny new technology trend, it gradually pulls your company away from any coherent identity.
You wake up 3 years in, and your product is just a Frankenstein monster of half-baked ideas.
Right. And then there's the burning of capital. Allocating resources without a definitive end state is basically capital destruction at an industrial scale.
Wow.
But honestly, the biggest cost is human. elite talent wants to build a definitive future, you know? They don't want to spend 5 years just iterating on a whim.
But wait, if wandering is so expensive and so inefficient, why did it work so reliably for the last 20 years? I mean, why did VCs keep funding it?
Because the technological environment was comparatively forgiving back then. Think about the Web 2.0 era, where the mobile app boom. Software development was relatively siloed. You're basically building an app, a discrete tool.
Right, it was just software.
Yeah, so a vague direction was fine because the variables were manageable. But today, we are facing this combinatorial explosion of converging exponential technologies.
Which means everything is accelerating at once.
Exactly. AI isn't just advancing in a vacuum, right? It's colliding with synthetic biology, which is colliding with advanced robotics, which is then colliding with space tech.
So the stakes of the game have entirely shifted. The environment is just too volatile to just set sail and hope for the best.
Precisely. When you're dealing with converging exponentials, a vague pivot doesn't just cost you a few months of runway anymore. It puts you entirely out of sync with the technological infrastructure of the decade. The founders of the future just cannot afford to be explorers. They have to be architects.
You have to engineer the journey.
Yes, because the destination is simply too massive to stumble into.
Let's talk about that destination then, because this is where the framework really leaves the billion-dollar unicorn in the dust. The book argues that the unicorn era is effectively over. Not because billion-dollar companies are failing, but because they have just become common.
They're just the new baseline now.
Right. The new target is the Solara.
And a Solara is defined very specifically as a trillion-dollar organization that fundamentally transforms humanity.
Okay, I can already hear people rolling their eyes at that. $1 trillion. I mean, it sounds like pure, unadulterated Silicon Valley arrogance. If you are sitting in a co-working space right now and you tell your seed investors you're building $1 trillion company, they are going to laugh you right out of the room.
Oh, they definitely will.
So how do you even justify conceptualizing a company at that kind of scale?
You justify it by looking at the underlying physics of the market, right? Not through the lens of 20th century business models. A unicorn typically achieves its valuation by selling a discrete product, or maybe a SaaS tool, into a national or maybe regional market.
So it operates on the economics of scarcity.
Exactly. It's capturing market share from competitors.
Yeah.
But a Solara operates on the economics of abundance. They don't build products, they build planetary-scale ecosystems.
Okay, let's break down the mechanics of that. Ecosystem versus product.
Sure. Think about it this way. A traditional company is kind of like an engineering firm that builds a highly efficient water well for a specific village, right?
Okay.
They sell the well, they maintain the well, they make a pretty good margin. But a Solara doesn't build a well. A Solara architects the entire planetary water grid.
Wow, so their addressable market isn't just a demographic.
No, it is the entire globe. They are organizing global commerce or planetary intelligence or maybe decentralized energy distribution. They create a platform where other massive companies actually build their businesses on top of the Solara's infrastructure.
So the Solara captures a fraction of the value of an infinitely expanding pie rather than fighting for a bigger slice of a fixed pie.
That's a great way to put it.
But still, $1 trillion. That scale of value creation from a single entity, it's hard to wrap your head around.
Well, consider the shift in technological infrastructure. I mean, 40 years ago, a supercomputer took up an entire floor of a building and cost tens of millions of dollars.
Right.
If someone told you back then that within a generation, half the planet would carry a networked supercomputer in their pocket, you would have called them arrogant and delusional.
True, you'd think they were crazy.
But the infrastructure shifted. Microchips, global supply chains, wireless networks, and today, the infrastructure shifting beneath us is artificial intelligence and digital networks. AI acts as this unprecedented multiplier.
It allows an organization to serve dramatically larger global markets without, like, a proportional increase in human headcount or physical overhead.
Exactly. The constraints of the physical world are lifting. The book makes a really compelling case that within a decade, we will see dozens of Solaras.
Dozens. Trillion-dollar entities tackling planetary challenges. But here is the operational bottleneck, right? You cannot Columbus your way into a planetary water grid.
Definitely not.
You can't just hack together an MVP over a weekend and iterate your way into global infrastructure, which means you need to know exactly what the end of the journey looks like on day one.
Which brings us to arguably the most crucial and probably the most difficult practice in the book, designing the grand Solara Vision.
And we need to be hyper clear here for anyone listening. A grand Solara Vision is absolutely not a corporate mission statement.
No, definitely not.
It is not that poster in the break room with an eagle soaring over a mountain that says, we aim to revolutionize global connectivity.
Right, because those statements are operationally useless. I mean, if you tell a team of elite software engineers and logistics experts to just revolutionize connectivity, you've given them zero constraints and zero direction.
It's just a platitude.
Exactly. A grand Solara Vision is an architectural blueprint of a future state that does not yet exist, and it relies on a methodology called working backward.
Okay, let's put this into practice. Walk me through the mechanics of working backward. If I'm a founder listening right now, how do I actually write this thing?
So you project yourself 20 years into the future. You imagine that your company has already achieved its Solara status. And from that vantage point in the future, you write out what the book calls future facts.
Future facts, not aspirations.
Right, not aspirations, not goals, facts. You describe the measurable characteristics, the specific scale, the scope, and the exact outcomes of your ecosystem as if they're already reality.
Give me a tangible example of a future fact versus just a vague mission.
Sure, so a vague mission would be something like, we want to improve global education through technology.
Sounds like every edtech startup pitch ever.
Right. But a grand Solara Vision future fact sounds like this. It is the year 2045. Every child on Earth, regardless of geographic location, has continuous access to a personalized AI tutor that adapts to their specific neurocognitive learning style, delivers world-class curriculum in their native language, and operates at a cost to the user of less than $1 per month.
Oh, wow. That is incredibly specific.
It is.
And I immediately see how that forces your hand operationally.
Right. It creates inescapable strategic constraints. If your target is a $1 per month global AI tutor, you instantly know what you should not be doing.
Right. You're not building physical charter schools.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You're not writing standardized textbooks. You are not hiring thousands of human administrators. The destination dictates that you must be world-class at large language models, localized translation algorithms, and hyper-efficient compute scaling just to drive costs down to $1.
The specificity of the future filters out the distractions of the present.
That is exactly the point.
It's sort of like the skyscraper analogy. You know, traditional startup advice says just focus on your next funding round, focus on shipping the next feature.
Yeah.
But if you are an architect building a 100-story skyscraper, you don't just hand a crew some steel and say, let's build something inspiring and figure out where the elevators go around floor 50.
No, the building would collapse.
Right. You need the complete blueprint before you pour the foundation.
Because without that blueprint, a 1,000-person organization will naturally, inevitably, pull in 1,000 slightly different directions. The vision eliminates that internal confusion.
Now, the external world will always be chaotic and uncertain.
Always. But the source material makes this profound distinction, which I love. External uncertainty is a fact of nature, but internal uncertainty about your destination is a failure of leadership.
You lock the destination in.
You lock it in.
Okay, I'm sold on the blueprint. I have my future facts. I know exactly what the skyscraper looks like. But how do you actually pave the road to get there over a 20-year time frame? Especially when the technological ground beneath you, like AI, regulatory environments, global supply chains, is shifting daily.
Well, that's where you build a Solara roadmap. And doing that requires understanding the fundamental difference between your vision and your roadmap.
Okay, unpack that.
The vision is the destination. It is sacred and it is fixed. But the roadmap is your route. And your route is entirely flexible. You build that route through something called milestone engineering.
Milestone engineering. Explain how that differs from traditional startup milestones, because usually a milestone is just, hitting 1 million active users or closing a Series B round or launching a new product tier.
Right, but those are growth events. They aren't engineering milestones. In the Solara framework, a milestone is the deliberate construction of a sequence-based capability.
Sequence-based capability.
Yeah, you are essentially building the machine that builds the machine. So, for example, if your ultimate 20-year destination is distributing personalized medicine globally, your first milestone isn't get 1 million users. Your first milestone might be engineering an AI model that can accurately predict protein folding for a single rare disease.
Ah, I see. You are unlocking a capability, not just hitting a metric.
Precisely. Because once you possess that capability, it expands the adjacent possible. It allows you to build the next capability, say, automating the synthesis of that specific protein. Each milestone serves as a structural foundation for the next. It's cumulative leverage.
That makes a lot of sense. But I keep coming back to the volatility of everything. I mean, you have a roadmap of sequence-based capabilities stretching out a decade. How do you plan that far ahead when generative AI alone is basically reinventing workflows every 6 months?
It's a huge challenge.
Right. If I'm driving across the country to New York and a massive storm washes out the highway, I don't abandon New York and decide to live at a gas station in Ohio. I find a detour. But how do you calculate the detours 10 years in advance?
You don't calculate them in advance. You utilize a mechanism called exponential replanning.
Exponential replanning, yeah.
A rigid, static plan assumes you can perfectly predict the future, which we know is impossible. But an adaptive roadmap assumes the future is highly uncertain while the destination remains non-negotiable. So to bridge that gap, Solar leadership conducts really intensive annual replanning.
So basically every 12 months you tear down the roadmap.
You stress test it against reality. You look at that combinatorial explosion of tech we talked about earlier, and you ask, which technologies accelerated faster than we anticipated? Which regulatory barriers arose out of nowhere? What new risks appeared on the horizon?
So it involves really rigorous scenario planning.
Exactly. You model out multiple plausible futures, like what if AI compute costs drop to near zero next year? Or what if a geopolitical conflict suddenly cuts off our primary hardware supply chain?
You risk forecast. You aren't just reacting to the news on a Tuesday. You have basically pre-computed contingency routes for when the environment shifts.
Yes. It's the bridge between a 20-year vision and a 1-year operating plan.
It keeps the organization deeply anchored to the future, but hyper-responsive in the present.
That's the perfect way to summarize it.
But here's the critical flaw in that process, at least if you don't have the right internal systems. A roadmap, no matter how adaptive it is completely useless if you don't actually know where you are on the map in real time. Like, if I'm driving that car to New York and my GPS goes dark and my speedometer breaks, I'm flying blind. To navigate exponential replanning, a Solara needs a totally different kind of nervous system.
Which is why the framework heavily emphasizes the construction of ground control. And the historical analogy here is really vital. Think back to Apollo 11 again.
Okay.
Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin were the tip of the spear, but the actual intelligence of the mission of the nervous system was in Houston.
Right. Mission control. Hundreds of engineers analyzing telemetry, managing oxygen levels, calculating orbital mechanics in real time.
Exactly. Ground control was an organizational philosophy of continuous distributed awareness. Now contrast that with how 99% of legacy companies are managed today. They operate on delayed awareness.
Oh, I want to upgrade the classic business cliche here. It's not just driving, looking in the rearview mirror. Managing a traditional company by quarterly reports is like flying a commercial airliner using a system of mechanical cables and pulleys. By the time the pilot actually feels the turbulence in the yoke, the plane is already dropping out of the sky.
That is exactly what it's like.
You get a report in October telling you that customer churn spiked in July.
And by then, the damage is already done. In an exponential environment, delayed awareness is just fatal. So ground control in the Solara is the equivalent of a modern fly-by-wire aviation system. It relies on AI-powered dashboards and real-time company intelligence that monitors navigation metrics rather than lagging indicators.
Navigation metrics. So these are predictive, right? They tell you the trajectory, not the history.
Right. Instead of looking at past revenue, you are looking at the velocity of code deployment or the real-time sentiment analysis of customer support interactions or even micro fluctuations in supply chain efficiency.
Wow.
But the true paradigm shift of ground control isn't just having a fancy dashboard in the CEO's office. It's that the awareness is entirely distributed. Every single employee, every piece of software, every node in the supply chain acts as a sensor.
Okay, I see where this is going, and I'm going to stop you right there because human beings simply cannot process that volume of data.
No, they definitely can't.
If every one of your 10,000 employees is a real-time sensor feeding telemetry into ground control, the executive team would be completely paralyzed by the noise.
Which is exactly why AI is the essential co-pilot of ground control. The AI continuously ingests this massive, unstructured flow of operational data. It filters the noise, it identifies the patterns, and it automatically surfaces anomalies.
So it does the heavy lifting before a human even sees it.
Exactly. If a specific component in your hardware is failing at a, say, 2% higher rate than expected in a specific climate, the AI flags it before a human engineer even thinks to look for it. It shifts the entire burden of leadership.
How so? Like, mechanically, how does leadership change?
Well, in a legacy system, leaders spend about 80% of their time just trying to gather and verify data so they can actually make a decision.
Right, chasing down reports and spreadsheets.
But in a Solara, the AI gathers the data and surfaces the predictive insight. The human leader's job shifts entirely to exercising high-level judgment and strategic wisdom based on that hyper-awareness. The organization literally develops real-time self-awareness.
It's a literal corporate nervous system.
Mm.
But this brings up a massive structural implication. If the AI is doing the data processing, surfacing the anomalies, and providing this hyper-awareness, what happens to the organizational chart? The human workforce has to fundamentally reorganize, right?
So clearly, the industrial era organizational chart, that rigid hierarchy of silos, it has to die.
Let's talk about that. The AI augmented Solara organization. Because for a century, we have organized human capital by function. You have your sales silo, your marketing silo, engineering, HR, legal.
And that structure was designed for the efficiency of the factory floor. Specialization made sense when tasks were repetitive and communication was really slow.
Sure.
But in the Solara model, the most complex trillion-dollar challenges do not respect functional boundaries. When a user interacts with your planetary ecosystem, they don't experience marketing and then later experience engineering. They experience the output holistically.
Right. And functionally, siloed companies are incredibly sluggish. I mean, I've seen this firsthand. A company will spend 60% of its kinetic energy just translating information across departmental borders.
It's exhausting.
You literally hire product managers whose only job is to negotiate treaties between the engineering department and the sales department. The friction is enormous.
Solaras eliminate that friction by organizing around missions, not functions.
Missions, okay.
Yeah, you deploy cross-disciplinary pods, so maybe a designer, a software engineer, a policy expert, and a supply chain logistician, and you point them at a specific future fact on the roadmap. But the real accelerant here is that these pods are deeply AI-augmented and globally distributed.
Okay, I'm going to push you on the AI-augmented piece, because when you tell a listener that AI systems are analyzing the data, writing the boilerplate code, generating the marketing copy, and autonomous systems are executing the decisions,
I know where you're going with this.
the immediate visceral human reaction is panic. If the machine is doing the work and the execution is pushed down to the edges of the network, what do the humans actually do? Are we just talking about a trillion-dollar company run by a founder, a server rack, and 3 guys in a basement?
It is the most common fear, but it completely misunderstands the economic objective. The framework is very clear on the difference between replacement and amplification.
Amplification versus replacement.
Right. AI in a Solara is not deployed to fire your engineers so you can save on payroll. It is deployed to remove cognitive scarcity so your engineers can scale their output exponentially.
Amplification. Walk me through what that actually looks like for a team on a day-to-day basis.
Okay, imagine a traditional software deployment that requires a department of 100 people. You've got front-end, back-end, QA testers, database managers. In a Solara, a pod of 10 exceptional humans, each augmented by autonomous AI agents, can produce the output capacity, the code quality, and the strategic nuance of that 100-person department.
Wow.
You aren't shrinking the company to save money. You're keeping the team lean so they can move at the speed of thought while producing the footprint of an absolute titan.
So a pod of 10 is generating hundreds of millions of dollars in value.
Yes. And it fundamentally redefines what it means to be a leader.
Yeah.
If you're a manager in the industrial model, your job is directing tasks.
Yeah.
You are basically a human router, checking on whether Jim finished his spreadsheet.
Right, micromanaging.
But in a Solara, leadership is designing environments. You architect the mission parameters, you provision the AI tool sets, you establish the ethical and operational boundaries, and then you step back. You let intelligent, high-velocity execution emerge organically from the edges of the network. You achieve massive scale without the crippling bureaucracy of traditional management.
You design the system. You don't micromanage the cogs. I love that.
Exactly.
But let's zoom out for a second, because building a globally distributed, hyper-aware, AI-augmented infrastructure like architecting a planetary water grid over a 20-year roadmap that requires a very specific type of fuel. And this is where the entire vision hits a brick wall if you aren't careful. We really need to talk about capital.
Financing the future. Because traditional venture capital is structurally incapable of building a Solara.
I want to dig into the mechanics of this because it's a blind spot for so many ambitious founders. If I have a vision for a $1 trillion ecosystem, my natural first instinct is to go to Sand Hill Road, pitch the top-tier VC firms and raise a massive seed round. Why is the book saying that is a lethal mistake?
Because of the duration and the incentives of the capital. Traditional VC was perfectly optimized for the Columbus era and that unicorn model.
Yeah.
A standard venture fund has a 10-year lifespan.
Okay.
They raise money from their limited partners, they invest in the first 3 years, and they need to return massive multiples to those partners by year 10.
Which means they are structurally desperate for a liquidity event. They need you to go public or get acquired in, 5 to 7 years so they can distribute the cash.
Exactly. It's high-octane rocket fuel.
Wow.
It is fantastic if you are launching a lightweight software tool with zero marginal costs and you want to scale user acquisition instantly.
Yeah.
But building a Solara involves civilization-scale infrastructure. You are talking about deploying global energy grids, financing orbital manufacturing, or standing up planetary AI compute centers. These are hardware-heavy, regulation-heavy, capital-intensive projects.
They don't just mature overnight.
No, they do not mature in 5 years. They take 20 or 30 years to compound into a trillion-dollar ecosystem.
So if you take that standard VC money, your financial architecture basically goes to war with your strategic architecture. You are trying to build a 30-year lunar colony, and your board of directors is demanding you sell the colony to Google in month 36 to hit their fund return metrics. It would rip the company apart.
It forces strategic drift. You end up abandoning the grand Solara vision to chase short-term profitability. The book introduces a critical concept here. Capital is an engineering material.
Capital is an engineering material. That is a brilliant reframe.
Isn't it?
You don't just take whatever money is available. You design the capital stack to match the structural integrity of the vision.
Right. You wouldn't build a skyscraper out of balsa wood just because someone offered it to you cheaply. So what are the materials for a Solara? You need patient capital.
Patient capital, like what?
These are family offices, long-duration institutional investors, or perpetual capital vehicles that explicitly value long-term capability creation over quarterly liquidity.
The book also leans heavily into sovereign capital and public-private partnerships, right?
Yes. Think about it historically. Who funded the most massive infrastructure leaks?
Governments.
Governments. The Interstate Highway System, the Apollo program, DARPA funding the early internet. Solaras are building the infrastructure of the 21st century. Therefore, they will increasingly align with sovereign wealth funds.
That makes sense.
A nation-state doesn't need a 5-year exit. A nation-state needs 20-year strategic security in AI compute or decentralized energy. The duration of their capital matches the duration of the Solaras vision.
That makes total mechanical sense, but it forces us into a very uncomfortable, unavoidable corner.
Oh, the ownership question.
Yes. If a founder uses this patient, sovereign capital, if they actually execute the 20-year roadmap, utilize AI amplification, and build a trillion-dollar ecosystem that practically functions as global infrastructure, who gets to keep the money?
This is where the framework pivots from operational mechanics to a radical redesign of capitalism itself. It introduces the founder's new social contract.
Because the 20th century answer is simple. The founder and the early investors keep it. They become centibillionaires, they buy a fleet of yachts, and they win capitalism.
Right, that's the old model.
If I'm a founder who just bled for 2 decades to build a Solara, my natural human instinct is to hoard the spoils. Why would I voluntarily surrender the financial reward of my life's work?
Because the book demands a rigorous analysis of the diminishing returns of personal wealth, and it separates the concept of control from the concept of economic ownership.
Break that down for us. Control versus economic ownership.
Let's address the wealth first. Going from $0 to $10 million fundamentally alters your existence. You have security, healthcare, comfort.
Life-changing, for sure.
Going from 10 million to 100 million buys you extreme luxury and generational legacy. But going from 100 million to $50 billion, it ceases to have any practical impact on your lived experience. It is simply a high score on a ledger.
You can still only eat 3 meals a day. You can only sleep in one bed at a time. The utility of the dollar just hits a wall.
Exactly. For a founder operating at the scale of a Solara, the psychology shifts. When you are engineering planetary infrastructure, mere financial accumulation becomes an impoverished metric of success. The ultimate scorecard shifts from how much capital did I hoard to what is my civilization scale impact.
I hear that, But founders are control freaks, and I don't mean that pejoratively. It's a requirement of the job. You don't
Right.
build a Solara by letting a committee vote on your roadmap. If they give away their equity, don't they lose the company?
Which is exactly why the distinction between voting control and economic ownership is the linchpin of this new social contract. The book proposes that founders establish voluntary wealth caps.
Walk me through the mechanics of a wealth cap.
Okay, so a founder might decide, my personal and family wealth is permanently capped at $100 million. They secure absolute financial freedom,
Right.
but they structure their equity through dual-class shares or purpose-built trusts so that they retain absolute voting control over the company. They remain the architect. They steward the mission.
Okay, so they keep the control. But what about the rest of the money?
All the excess economic value of their shares, the billions or hundreds of billions of dollars generated by the Solara, is irrevocably legally directed away from their personal estate and into foundations, trusts, and public purpose institutions.
Wow. It's the evolution of ownership into stewardship. They keep the steering wheel, but they route the exhaust pipe, this massive financial surplus, directly back into humanity.
Because every founder is temporary. You will eventually retire or you will die. If the integrity of a trillion-dollar planetary ecosystem relies solely on the whims of your personal estate or your heirs, it is incredibly fragile.
That's a huge point.
By routing the economic ownership into public purpose institutions from day one, you build a structure that outlives you. You prove that hyper-capitalistic ambition and profound societal contribution are not mutually exclusive. In the Solara era, they are synergistic.
Okay, let's play this scenario out to its logical conclusion. You have these hyper-efficient AI-augmented Solaras generating trillions in value. You have founders capping their wealth and redirecting hundreds of billions of dollars into these newly formed public purpose foundations. Suddenly, we have capital pools that rival the GDP of mid-sized nations, specifically earmarked for human impact.
Right.
What do they actually do with it?
They apply the exact same rigorous Armstrong-style engineering mindset to humanity's most intractable social failures. And the book points directly to the ultimate failure: extreme global poverty.
This is such a fascinating pivot because the historical accepted wisdom is that poverty is just a tragic, permanent condition of the human experience. The poor will always be with you.
That's the narrative, yes.
And it's not for lack of trying. Humanity has thrown trillions of dollars at poverty over the last 60 years. We have massive federal aid programs, the UN, thousands of NGOs, charities, and yes, global poverty rates have declined, but extreme poverty still persists tenaciously. So I have to push back here. Why on earth would a tech founders foundation succeed where the combined might of global governments has struggled so mightily?
Because the Tech Foundation recognizes that poverty is not a mystical societal condition. It is a mechanical distribution and engineering problem. The reason governments failed to eradicate it wasn't a lack of money, and it wasn't a lack of empathy. It was the crippling friction of delivery.
The friction of delivery, meaning the actual mechanics of getting the dollar into the hand of the person who actually needs it?
Exactly. Imagine a federal government trying to deliver financial aid to a subsistence farmer in a remote village 30 years ago. How does the money travel?
Very slowly.
It goes from the federal treasury to a regional government to a local bureaucratic office, down to a physical bank branch, and eventually out to a local administrator. And at every single node in that analog network, massive percentages of the capital are lost to administrative overhead, logistical friction, political inefficiency, and outright corruption.
By the time the resource reaches the farmer, it is a fraction of its original value.
And it's usually delivered months too late. The analog infrastructure was fundamentally broken.
So what is the Solara approach then? You engineer a new delivery infrastructure. The book lays out a very specific anti-poverty stack. Let's break down the mechanics of this stack layer by layer because this is where the theory really hits the road.
Okay, so the foundational layer is digital identity. You cannot distribute abundance to someone if you cannot verify their existence in the system. Historically, a lack of formal identification locked billions of people out of the global economy.
So you establish a cryptographically secure biometric digital identity for every human being.
Yes. Then the next layer is ubiquitous mobile connectivity, the supercomputer in the pocket we talked about. Once an individual has a digital identity linked to a connected device, you build the third layer: instant digital payment rails.
Right, and the book cites systems like Aadhaar and UPI in India as kind of primitive early iterations of this concept, right?
Exactly. And when you combine those three layers, identity, connectivity, and payment rails, you completely bypass the analog bureaucracy. A Solara Foundation can transfer capital directly to a single mother in a remote village instantly, with near zero friction and near zero leakage.
Wow.
You don't need a local corrupt administrator to hand her cash. It just appears in her digital wallet.
Direct, unconditional cash transfers. You treat the individual as the best allocator of capital for their own life, letting them decide if they need to buy seeds or medicine or school books, rather than having some NGO administrator in Geneva decide for them.
It restores agency. But the final, most revolutionary layer of the stack is artificial intelligence. The AI acts as the ground control for the foundation.
How does that work?
It can continuously ingest anonymized macroeconomic data, agricultural yields, weather patterns, and localized health indicators. It identifies emerging vulnerabilities dynamically.
Give me a mechanical example of that in action.
Sure. Let's say the AI monitors a region and detects that a specific weather pattern will likely destroy the local crop yield in 3 weeks, which will historically lead to a spike in malnutrition and predatory microlending in that area.
Okay, so a crisis is brewing.
Right. But before the crisis even manifests, the AI proactively routes targeted microgrants directly into the digital wallets of the vulnerable farmers in that specific region. It prevents the economic collapse before it even happens.
That is quite literally mission control for human upliftment. You aren't just reacting to poverty, you are engineering systems that make extreme poverty structurally impossible. And the founders are building this philanthropic architecture into the DNA of the company from day one, rather than waiting until they are 80 years old to start writing checks. It is just breathtaking. Which brings us, finally, to the endgame here. The ultimate horizon of the Neil Armstrong Way.
The Solara century. But what does the world look like when this framework actually succeeds at scale?
The book paints a picture of a world where it's not just one or two of these companies, but hundreds of Solaras operating simultaneously. They are coordinating global logistics, scaling limitless clean energy, managing planetary AI. We transition entirely from the economics of scarcity into the economics of abundance.
And we really need to define abundance carefully here. Human history has largely been defined by zero-sum scarcity, a brutal fight over who gets the largest slice of a finite pie. The Solara century is about utilizing converging exponential technologies to basically build a machine that bakes infinite pies. When AI drives the marginal cost of cognitive labor to near zero, and advanced renewables drive the cost of energy to near zero, the foundational building blocks of human survival become ubiquitous and cheap.
But the author is very careful to ground this, and I appreciate that the book doesn't veer into naive utopianism. It doesn't claim this somehow magically solves human nature.
No, it is explicitly not a utopia. Abundance does not eliminate conflict. Political ideologies will still clash. Cultural and religious differences will remain. The human capacity for greed and tribalism doesn't vanish just because energy is cheap.
So what actually changes then?
The floor of human existence. The baseline reality of what it means to be born on this planet rises dramatically. The ceiling of human ambition goes up, but the floor comes up with it. Extreme physical deprivation is engineered out of the system.
That is incredible.
However, this raises an enormous challenge regarding governance. These private institutions, these Solaras, will wield capabilities that were traditionally the exclusive domain of nation-states. They will manage infrastructure that entire continents rely on.
Which requires an entirely new framework of institutional responsibility. The goal of entrepreneurship can no longer be disrupt the market and maximize shareholder value. When you are operating at the scale of a nation-state, your mandate has to be human flourishing.
It forces a collaborative governance model between the Solaras and the sovereign states. It's the ultimate realization of the Armstrong Way. Humanity intentionally engineering its own evolution.
It is a massive, awe-inspiring vision for anyone building a company today. So let's recap this journey. We are at a critical inflection point. The Columbus era, the age of wandering in the dark, launching blindly, celebrating accidental pivots, and tolerating the massive hidden costs of strategic drift is closing.
And the Neil Armstrong era is opening. The blueprint is clear. You reject survivorship bias. You aim for the trillion-dollar Solara destination by architecting planetary ecosystems rather than discrete products.
You utilize working backward to write concrete future facts.
You build an adaptive roadmap of sequence-based capabilities, navigated by an AI-powered ground control.
You augment a lean, distributed workforce to amplify human output.
You fund the journey with patient sovereign capital. You cap your personal wealth to steward the mission. And you deploy that abundance to engineer the end of systemic societal failures.
You move from accidental greatness to engineered futures. It fundamentally changes the core question of the entrepreneur.
Yeah.
You no longer ask, what might we discover if we wander out there? You ask, what specific future are we going to build?
It demands an incredible amount of rigor, but the payoff is literally the actual trajectory of human history.
Which leaves us with one final provocative thought, something I really want you, the listener, to chew on as you look at your own company's roadmap tomorrow morning.
Oh, this is a big one.
If human ambition truly is an exponential curve, if founders adopt this framework and we actually build these systems, if the trillion-dollar Solara eventually becomes as ordinary and ubiquitous as the billion-dollar unicorn is today, what comes after the Solara? When humanity has successfully engineered its way out of earthly scarcity, when the floor of human existence has been universally raised and the planetary water grid is running flawlessly, what new, unimaginable destination will the next generation of architects choose to aim for?
Because the frontier never actually closes. It just expands outward. The moment we secure the Earth, the Armstrong Way demands we look at the stars.
Exactly. The landscape of the future will always be murky, but we don't need a map of what's already there. We just need the blueprint to build what comes next.